Welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast. I'm Ruth, a personal finance blogger right here in Aotearoa. And in this podcast, I chat with a diverse bunch of people. And as you know, I learn their story and I try my hardest to condense it down so that you can hear helpful, relatable stories from Kiwis who are sharing their experiences, their tips, and their point of view on personal finance here in New Zealand. Now, meeting today's Kiwis started in the same way as many others, via an email. Today's couple is in their mid-40s and they wanted to be called Tokyo and Rio from the series Money Heist, apparently. She, Tokyo, said they absolutely loved that show and are as deeply in love as the characters of the show were. So that sets the scene nicely, I think. Tokyo wrote to me in October of 2023, so nearing Christmas, saying to me, "Hi Ruth, I started a Christmas sinking fund about 11 months ago and boy is it making me happy right now." She explained that it had been a very expensive year where her household had earned a lower than expected income, so knowing that she already had money to buy gifts was a big relief, and I was really pleased to hear it. Sinking funds are a brilliant idea. And so it began, emails back and forth between Tokyo and I. She went on to explain why the year had been expensive. An overseas trip that emptied the coffers, big bills for their rental property, which they hadn't set cash aside for, and both a tax and ACC bill as a result of working for herself. To cover it all, she was considering requesting a $15,000 mortgage top-up, something that they'd not done in years, and adding to their existing $168,000 mortgage. A mortgage that she considered to be quite low these days. She concluded that $15,000 would tidy up all of these expenses. She explained that things might have been different if her income as a contractor hadn't been so sluggish, but here we are. And don't worry, she said, she was hustling her butt off looking for more work, so taking on more debt was just a stopgap solution. And she thought there might even be enough left over from the $15,000 to start an emergency fund because there was the expectation of an emergency trip back to help family in the UK on their horizon too. She specifically asked me if a top-up loan is worth considering or if I knew of another option. Well, she clearly had not been reading my blog for long because I'm not a fan of endlessly extending mortgages. And yes, of course there is another option. So I hit reply to her email and proceeded to throw the cat amongst the pigeons. But you know the drill. Before I move on and tell you all about this Waikato family, here's a quick message from today's sponsor. I like to think of myself as being onto it when it comes to knowing what my money is up to when I'm not looking. But I can't be paying attention all the time. Thank goodness for Pocketsmith. While I was soundly sleeping recently, somebody silently took money for a software subscription I had forgotten I even had. The next morning, coffee in hand, Pocketsmith immediately highlighted this transaction. A quick check using their powerful search engine for transactions showed me that a year had flown by since I'd first signed up. Straight away, I contacted the company, cancelled the subscription, and had them reimburse the charge. If you want to find expenses in your budget that you have forgotten, Pocketsmith is your secret weapon to regain control of your finances, avoid unnecessary spending, and reallocate funds to more meaningful or essential areas of your life. If you want to supercharge your finances with Pocketsmith, have we got a deal for you. Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. Now, put your running shoes on, put the dog on the lead, or start that car journey you are on and brace yourselves for a long but very interesting episode. Because now, much to Tokyo's surprise, I, of course, responded to her email. And although happy to give her my thoughts, given that she took the time to ask for them, I needed her to keep in mind that I've got no financial qualifications and that these were just my opinions, and she could take from them what she liked, discard the rest, and proceed with her own life. I pointed out that her bank only has one agenda, to keep her borrowing money. That's their business model, after all. So asking the opinions of moi, a random stranger, would probably give her a different response to what she might otherwise be looking for. So I told her that if I woke up in her shoes, I wouldn't borrow even more money, given that I already owed $168,000, which I actually considered to be a big debt. To me, borrowing even more money is the easier way out of a situation that I should have seen coming. I knew I was taking an overseas holiday. I knew I'd earn an income and need to pay taxes and ACC, and I knew that a rental property would always need money spent on it. No surprises there. Instead of adding to my debt, I'd hustle my butt off to earn $15,000 as fast as I possibly could to cover those expenses. Because I said, today it's just $15,000 you are borrowing, tomorrow it will be $5,000 or $20,000, who knows. She'd alluded to adding to her debts in the past, so I'd not be surprised that she would do it again and again. Instead, I encouraged her to scale back her expenses and earn as much as she possibly could. And I also pointed out that I didn't want her to think the mortgage is quite low these days. Instead, I wanted her to think, as soon as we get that $168,000 paid off, we are debt-free. My take on things is that if you feel a level of comfort with your debt, which she very much sounded like she did, well, you will always stay in debt. The majority of the financially independent people I know have no debt, which indicates to me that you really should get rid of it. Now, many years ago, I explained, Johnny and I decided to get rid of our banker, who at that time was also our mortgage advisor, by becoming debt-free, and I encouraged Tokyo to give them a bit of warning that she is going to be breaking up with them. But to do that, she would have to stop borrowing more money. And finally, I signed off with a "you can do this," because I absolutely believe that she could. Well, a day or two went by and I received a response. And did she like my response? Not in the beginning. She said that she had slept on it for a night or two and processed all her feelings about my email because she said she had an unexpected reaction to it. She did not like it at all at first. Why not? Well, there is nothing like undeniable truth to poke you in the sore spot, she said. She admitted that borrowing more money was the easy way out, and she really considered ignoring me and never responding, instead going ahead with her plan A, which she now called an easy option. But I won't do that, she said. Although my opinions felt to her like ripping off a plaster, she said that upon reflection I gave her the reality check that she needed at that point in time. She vowed to continue to progress her journey to learn more and do better with money. She immediately went and spoke with her husband Rio, and together they agreed not to take on the $15,000 top-up loan, but to hustle harder to make money instead. She said he didn't take much convincing, as he's never been much of a fan of debt anyway, apparently. So a lean Christmas awaited them, and they were determined to get through their current expenses without taking on more debt, even if it meant ringing a few creditors and explaining their situation and asking for a bit of leniency. See, I told her she could do it. Tokyo said that even the simple encouragement was a huge help. It's amazing how just a bit of belief and encouragement from others can work wonders. My "you can do this" was not a flippant sign-off I add to the bottom of every email. You see, the Happy Saver has put me in the very fortunate position of watching countless people just like her go against the grain of the common wisdom around money, namely that debt is perfectly normal. Instead of stumbling along doing what is perceived as normal, which is mortgage for life, extending the mortgage to paper over the cracks, cars on finance, no retirement savings, holidays on credit, a rental that they never get to collect the rent on, etc., 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 the people I am fortunate enough to meet decide to do things a bit differently and take control of their money. I said, you can do this because I absolutely believe she could. The turnarounds I have seen are proof of that. With the meagre information I read about her, I could sense an intelligent woman capable of doing better. Now, on my blog, I have a Net Worth Millionaire questionnaire that I encourage people to fill out once they cross over the $1 million mark. And number 203 made a comment recently that really stood out to me when they said, quote, "To date, I have fallen well short of my potential." Now, within a few short years, these people transformed their financial situation. I meet a lot of people just like this who just decide to pay attention to their putia and do better, and they do. I suspected Tokyo was one of them, so my email was a nudge to make her do that. So, do you want to know what happened next? Well, annoyingly for you, I'm going to make you wait a little longer because first I want to back up a bit and learn a bit more about Tokyo and Rio and how they got themselves into the slightly tricky situation in the first place. Tokyo was actually born in Britain in the late 1970s. Rio was also born around that time, except near Wellington in New Zealand, and his family were in the military, so they moved around Aotearoa quite a bit. Now, I only spoke to Tokyo for this call, but she did her best to speak for them both. She and her younger sister had a comfortable upbringing, and she was the first from her whānau to go to university. And while neither of her parents had the opportunity to do any further study, over the years they moved up the career ladder regardless. Her mum started out in a secretarial role in an insurance company, and her dad began his working life as a sewing machine maintenance guy, back when that was a thing. Now, in the 80s, because of his skills with light machinery, her dad actually got the opportunity to do tech repair on the very early computers for companies that were starting to bring them into their businesses. And this gave him his start into what would become known as the IT industry. Through the years, he moved up the ladder, came off the tools, and moved into management. And at a certain point, the company he worked for were acquired by a larger company, giving him greater opportunities to move into management and consultancy in the tech industry right when it was boom time. She said there was loads of money to be made, and her parents got themselves a nice house in an outer suburb of London and commuted to the city to work. Her early memories of her father are of him leaving home in the dark and coming home in the dark. Corporate events and dinners kept him out late, but there were also lots of bonuses for the family, as his job and income allowed them overseas holidays and the ability to buy the fancy things in life. Then, in the late 1980s, the share market crashed, and although she was only young, it put a stop to all the work perks that the family used to enjoy. Eventually, things recovered, and her father's career in particular continued to climb. And although his salary made their nice life possible, the roles he took on were very high pressure, and she didn't see him a lot. Now, in terms of how the family managed their money, they were classic British, she said. They never talked about it. It was rude to do so. But she said it didn't stop them from gossiping about others around them, though. She does, however, recall that while her dad liked to spend, her mum appeared to be more conscious of money, more of a saver, and was a meticulous bookkeeper. Tokyo often noticed her checking receipts and noting things in checkbooks, but she was never shown it or had anything explained to her. Now, I'll mention it again that you have to speak to your tamariki about money. The best thing you can do for your children is include them in day-to-day money talk at home. Now, I've lost track of the parents I speak with today who say, my parents never taught me anything about money. And when I ask them if they are now teaching their own children, you can see the surprise on their faces when they realise that they're not. Tokyo's parents are now in their 70s, and she said she still has very little clue about their financial situation, but her inkling is that the tug-of-war between a spender and a saver continues. Now, again, I heard the story of a child being taught that working hard is the key to success, but no education was given about what to do with the money that this hard work generates. It's all very well to teach your tamariki how to work hard and save, but then we encourage them to also spend all they save. You know probably by now that I actively encourage my daughter to work and invest. By setting aside a portion of income into an ETF investment in her case, given a little time, that money will make more money. Alongside investing, she can save for short-term spending goals in the bank. Now, Tokyo has no memory of ever receiving pocket money, and she started babysitting for neighbours at about the age of 14, which gave her some cash in her pocket, a feeling that she quite liked. Soon after, and with her mum's encouragement, she had the get up and go to walk down the main street, entering every business asking for work. She was probably nervous as heck and slightly terrified to do so, but she knew that this was how you got a Saturday job, and she just repeated the same question all the way down the main street until a barber shop took her on, working on Saturdays as their salon assistant, earning £2.50 an hour plus tips. And when she was a little older, she got a job working retail in a toy shop, and surely this must be every kid's dream job. And, like her parents, working their way up in their careers, she learned a lot of new skills. She learned to handle cash and how a warehouse works, and as soon as she was deemed competent, she was actually given the keys to the shop and she handled the opening and closing. She said that she was pretty academically able and balanced work and schooling pretty well. A family friend then gave her a job in a cafe that also did catering work, and she worked there on and off for years as she completed her schooling. And she ended up running small catering events by herself and gained a lot of independence and new skills. Her income all went into her bank account, and as far as she can recall, she spent it all having fun with her friends. There was never any discussion about savings. There were no budgeting systems set up. She just earned it and spent it with no input from family. And again, I see this all the time today, but I think the difference is a lot of teenagers are earning quite big incomes, and without any money talk at home, money comes in, money goes straight back out. Her school really encouraged her to go to university, and when she began a degree in French with an intention to head into teaching, it was fees-free. However, that soon changed, and while her memory was pretty hazy, she thinks she might have started taking out a student loan for living expenses. Her parents didn't support her financially while she studied, and she didn't work that first year, but she soon got part-time work in pubs and restaurants, and you guessed it, she spent all the money. However, as she was in her very early 20s and about to begin her third year of study, something happened financially that gave her a massive boost. She was watching the TV show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and she saw an advertisement saying, "Phone this number if you want to be a contestant." So she did, and within a week, she found herself a contestant on the TV show. And get this, she won about £32,000, which in today's Kiwi money, that's about 150 grand. Incredible. She took the cheque to the bank to cash it, and given she was in her early 20s, they actually made her sit with an advisor, and he told her to open up some investments, which he split into 3 chunks of conservative, balanced, and growth investment funds. And she is grateful that they did this, and she feels they really did have her best interests in mind by doing so. She also left a chunk in her cheque account, which she used to pay off her student loan, and she bought her first car, and she blew some on a few big nights out with friends, but she managed to leave the invested money alone. Until, at some point in the early 2000s, she freaked out when she became aware that share markets were dropping, and she sold out right when things were at their worst, and she now realizes that she actually did completely the wrong thing, because you only lose money in the share market when you sell and lock in those losses. Had she just held on, they would have recovered, and it was a shame that the advisor was not available to her at that time to teach her why holding her ground would have been the better long-term strategy. And her regret today is that she didn't pay more attention to their advice at that initial meeting. From that point on, she has only kept cash in a savings account with her bank, and eventually she brought that dwindling balance over here to New Zealand. After she won the money, she didn't really see the need to work much. Instead, she finished up her studies, which made her a qualified French teacher. Then she went on a cycling holiday around Europe with a friend. I was pleased to hear her bank did its very best for her. But what about her parents? While proud of her TV achievement, not a word was said to her about what to do with the winnings. She thinks her parents just assumed and trusted that she would do okay. If winning the money marked a turning point in her life, providing money to ease her path through her university career, now that she was a teacher, it was a 2005 trip to Africa in her September school holidays that was to be another big pivot point in her life. By this point, she was very independent and had already done some backpacking around Europe, so a trip to Africa was yet another exciting adventure. While waiting in the airport departure lounge, unknown to her at the time, she caught sight of her future husband for the first time, a big, tall Kiwi who really stood out, and who she would later come to know was called Rio. And what do you know? 2 days later, when she and her friend joined the tour group that they would be travelling with, there was Rio, the big, tall Kiwi from the plane ride. And the rest, they say, is history. After a 50-night first date, which was the length of the tour they were both on, they have now been together for almost 20 years. They consider themselves one of those lucky couples who have found their soulmate in life, she said. So how did Rio come to be there, you might ask? Rio, who was the youngest of 3, he had been travelling and working abroad for some time, managing to visit 36 countries while overseas, and because his visa was just about to run out, Africa was his last trip before flying home to Aotearoa. Now, given this was Rio's last big hurrah before returning home, he had managed his money down to the very last cent, and he didn't factor finding a future wife into his budgeting. He knew he had enough money to get drunk often and sleep in a tent for free each night. But now that he was on the first date that never ended, some upgrades were called for, namely paying for a room each and every night. So while he paid for that, Tokyo paid for snacks and food, and everything felt near perfect day in and day out. But towards the end of the trip, he shared with her that he had completely run out of money because meeting her had blown his budget just straight out of the water. Again, a chunk of money came her way at just the right time. While travelling, she had actually received an email telling her that one of her grandparents, who had passed away earlier, had actually left her £5,000. Awesome, she thought. More cash for more fun. But instead of paying for one, she was now happily paying for two. And over the course of the 50-night African adventure, these two had become inseparable. And because he was out of money and she now had some, well, they just naturally started managing the money together. He returned penniless to Hamilton, but very much in love, and she got busy organising a working visa so she could come to New Zealand. And by February of 2006, she was here, renting a home with Rio and getting on with creating her Kiwi life. From the very beginning, they thought of money as theirs, not mine or yours. No one kept score, and even though he already had a few of his own bank accounts, they opened new ones in joint names. And their thoughts on shared finances then, and they remain the same right now, are that you share your body and your entire life with each other, so why would you be funny about money and separate that out as the thing that you do alone? It's bizarre, and it makes no sense to either of them, she said. She came into the relationship with more money than Rio, but there have been other times when they relied on him as a breadwinner. Their individual financial inputs ebb and flow, but neither has ever kept score. They both have a 50-50 stake in their relationship, and they feel that anything other than that doesn't set you up for the right mindset, ethos, or ethics. Now, moving to New Zealand was a huge adjustment for Tokyo. And her first few years were not super happy, mainly because it just took her a while to find her feet professionally. She started doing random temping jobs straight away, which marked the beginning of her frugality, embracing less is more because she simply had to, because money was tight, finding enjoyment in the simple things and not being surrounded by consumerism. When they got married, Tokyo's parents contributed about $16,000 to their wedding, and their low-key beach wedding came in well under that amount, leaving them money to upgrade their four-wheel drive, which they used for adventures, and take an 8-week backpacking trip back to Africa, where it all began. And they returned home to Aotearoa having spent every penny. And it was at this point I'm beginning to see a few themes emerge here, as I'm sure you are too. Wealth is created or won before being spent down to zero, and then they just start that process again. Rio had worked in landscaping since his 20s, becoming a foreman running different jobs, but Tokyo never returned to teaching. Instead, she worked her way into a local government job with the city council. Around 2008, 2 years after she arrived in New Zealand, they experienced a money failure when they entered into a landscaping business with another couple. Now, although they got advice early on about setting up a company with others, they didn't listen to the advice about creating an exit agreement if any of the parties changed their minds. Things did not go well quite quickly, and within 18 months the partnership ended. Using some of these savings that they had created, and in an effort to move on swiftly, she said that they paid out the other couple in an overly generous way and took over the business. Now, despite this concern over financial viability of the landscaping business, it didn't deter them from buying a house in 2009 for $245,000. She can't recall the size of their first BNZ mortgage, nor the deposit they paid, but she thinks the deposit was barely 10% and made up from what she called the dregs of the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire money that she had brought over from the UK, plus some savings that they'd cobbled together, and she said that they may have even used a credit card towards their deposit. So regardless of how it came to be, it was enough to get them a home, and they remain in that same home today. However, while Rio enjoyed the landscaping work, he didn't enjoy aspects of running the business itself, and it limped along for 4 years, basically making no money and even worse, costing them money. During this time, Tokyo's almost $70,000 gross annual income was able to support them and pay their new mortgage, but it was a stressful time, she said, and they were naive to go into business in the first place and were pleased when it ended. Now, personally, I think that there are a lot of businesses just like this in New Zealand, and if people actually did the math, they would realise that their venture is completely unviable and it is at best just a hobby. However, she said 3 good things came from the experience. Firstly, Rio realised that he was far happier working for wages as a PAYE employee. It's a cut and dried transaction. You do the mahi and you get paid for the work. Second, they met their accountant, who, she said, has been helpful in teaching them about money. Thirdly, Tokyo actually enjoyed learning about running a business. In 2011, right at the tail end of this failed business venture, their first child was born, and she took a year off to care for them, and due to a now very limited income, she had to try to get more savvy with money. Tokyo said that in 2010, 2011, they began to, in her words, play around with the New Zealand home loan mortgage, which tells me that they were clearly at least trying to find new and better ways to handle their mortgage. Now, I'm not sure how they work these days, but back then your entire debt was basically in one bank account. All your income went into it, all of your expenses came out of it. And for those disciplined people, you steadily spend less than you earn, bringing your total balance back to zero and becoming mortgage-free. Discipline is the key word here. But for Rio and Tokyo, it didn't work because they were not living within their means. They were spending more than they earned. The revolving credit mortgage kept them constantly at the limit of their lending. They are a dangerous banking product to use if you don't budget well. Their second child was born in 2013, and their birth coincided with her being made redundant from her job. So she got a redundancy payment, and she can't recall the amount, but she no longer had a job to return to. So now home with 2 children, she jumped into parenthood, joining Play Centre and volunteering and helping in the community. And with Rio back earning wages of about $50,000 a year, things settled down. But in 2014, 2015, she knew she really needed to start paying more attention to their money. She remembers realising that they were using the redundancy money they had put into a savings account to top themselves up each month because Rio's $50,000 income was just not enough to cover all of their outgoings. And she remembers sitting down and having the clarity of thought to ask herself the question, when will we run out and what will we do then? They were steaming towards a wake-up call. She thought of it as ground zero. So they entered a very difficult financial period. An emergency situation impacted a close family member, and Rio needed to immediately go to be with them. And Tokyo said that they made the joint decision to open a credit card with a $3,000 limit to cover all of his costs. She said that they had learned about zero balance transfers, and even as they took on the debt, she was gearing up to move money around to manage future credit card bills, which they could not pay, or in her words, to manage a tight position that she knew was coming her way. Now, the point of this podcast is to help other people avoid situations just like this. Having shared the details with me, I've no doubt that Rio had to go to be with his whānau, no doubt at all. But for those listening, this is why you will continue to hear those who feel successful with money say that having an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of expenses is critical to their financial well-being. To be able to get on a plane without worrying about the financial implications is the definition of financial freedom, and it can enable you to be fully present with the very people you are trying to help without financial fear lingering in the back of your own mind. When 2015 dawned, she knew she had to find work again. Otherwise, she said, they would be financially screwed, and they would begin to miss making mortgage payments. The last of their meagre savings was almost gone. She started applying for work, using every contact that she had, pulling every lever that she could, but there was nothing about until one day it occurred to her that people would pay her directly for the things that she could do. So she cobbled together what she called a patchwork business. She did anything for anyone using the skills she had built up over the years, mostly doing administration and business finances work for anyone that needed her, and she started billing out her work. If anyone asked her if she could do a particular job, she firstly said, "Yep, I can do that," and then she rapidly worked out how. And she discovered her hustler gene, she said. Her motivation was that she just had to make money for her whānau. In 2016, they refinanced their debt and they moved to Kiwibank. And the main lure to move to them was that they would get a trip to Fiji. Now, because I smelled a giant rotting rat here, I had to ask how much extra she paid for this supposedly free trip. The flights and 4 nights of accommodation were paid, but they stumped up an additional $1,500 to cover all other costs. Of course they did. The promise of a holiday is one of the worst things you can base such a momentous financial decision on. So how much did changing the lender move the needle on their debt, you might ask? Well, we'll never know. In 2016, Rio also left the world of landscaping and he became a full-time firefighter. Now, it's low pay when you start as a firefighter. For him, it was about $46,000 a year, plus overtime, but it does increase significantly from there. And in 2023, he earned $138,000 gross a year. Plus, they have their own pension scheme, and for every dollar he puts in, they put in $1.52. As of April 2024, he has a balance of $73,669. Plus, he also has a KiwiSaver account with a balance of $27,000. In May of 2024, she shared an interesting update on his 2 retirement accounts. Rio was shocked to learn that the IRD had restarted KiwiSaver deductions from his pay. They had been voluntarily contributing $20 a week to his KiwiSaver so that he would receive the annual $521 from the government, but their main focus was on the private super scheme that he was in. He thought he had opted out of KiwiSaver, but it turns out that this request had actually been declined, and he was pretty ticked off and he wanted his money back. No can do. They have him on a contribution suspension for now, but really, Tokyo said she doesn't see any major harm having been done here, and his balance is certainly higher because of it, which will grow and compound nicely in the years ahead. Of course, there is a simple solution as well. Read your payslip, as that should clearly show deductions. Plus, sign into your KiwiSaver every 6 months or so just to check on its progress. Now, of all the financial stuff-ups you can make, this is one of the better ones. On the advice of her accountant, who told her not to bother, sadly, she didn't start KiwiSaver until 2017, and she has only ever contributed the minimum amount required to receive the government amount of $521 annually. So as a result, her balance is a very low $18,000, but it is in a high-growth fund with the provider Simplicity. Now remember that most accountants are not financial advisors, and if you are self-employed and they are telling you not to bother with KiwiSaver, do some more research. Otherwise, you run the risk of reaching retirement and relying on the pension alone. Saving for retirement in New Zealand is a necessary thing, not a nice to have, so please do plan accordingly. If you combine all of their retirement savings together, they have a balance of $119,000, which is a good amount to build upon. However, my concern is that if the private pension scheme is accessible money after he leaves the fire service, this amount might never make it to retirement. The difficulty with accessible pensions is that they are too easy to spend on something other than retirement. And already, this couple have experienced a number of situations where they have spent their savings, and I just wouldn't put it past them to do it again in the future. I really do actually like the locked-in aspect of KiwiSaver for this very reason. Also in 2016, Tokyo got a lucky break into a higher-paying hourly rate when a woman at their local council needed someone to write a one-off report. This one-off job led to more, and before long, she found herself working as an independent contractor from her local council office. She re-established contact with old acquaintances, and up until recently, word of mouth got her diverse and interesting work. However, because she was not a PAYE employee and instead took director's drawings, she was constantly on the back foot when it came to the tax owing. She had to wait till financial year end to know her full tax position, and in 2022 this caught her out with a tax bill she had not set aside enough money to pay for. Her business had had a great year and she earned more income, but she hadn't set enough tax aside as she should have. Plus, around that time, and having gone through COVID and what have you, work got patchy, her income dropped, and when you are working for yourself and you don't have the reliability of PAYE income, that is a big concern. Around 2017-2018, she started to get interested in buying a rental property as an investment. Her accountant, again, was pro-investment property, And just looking around her, Tokyo noticed that people she considered wealthy also seemed to own property. Looking for more knowledge about investing in general, she joined the Kiwi Moustachians Facebook page, she got excited about index funds, and she started reading about FIRE, which is Financial Independence Retire Early, and learning about the 4% rule. She worked the math that said that if you've got $1 million invested in a large, low-fee ETF or index fund, you could create passive income of $40,000 a year. That number didn't motivate her though, it just scared the heck out of her, and she just couldn't understand how on earth you managed to acquire $1 million in the first place. But they made a tiny start, and in 2018 they opened an account with Sharesies, investing $50 a month, and in Tokyo's words, playing around and testing it out. She had followed the progress of KiwiSaver and managed fund provider Simplicity since 2017, and when they reduced the minimum investment amount in 2020, it suddenly felt like it was something they could afford to do. So they opened a managed fund, which, although it does invest in index funds, is not technically an index fund itself, and she grew its balance to $3,700. Now today, both of these investments have stalled or been sold due to lack of funds to contribute to them, but they are using Sharesies for their children's investments. She said that she, like many, are quite impulsive when they hear a good idea that is easy to sign up for, and she has often opened random bank accounts and started saving up little bits and pieces. Now, this is a good habit to have, but it just needs to be refined. But all of these little attempts grew her knowledge. Now, property to her seemed easier to understand, and with no shortage of free webinars to entice you in, she set about creating a strategy of her own. Although not completely sold on property as a way to grow wealth, she said she started playing around the fringes and asking around as to how they could get on the rental property buzz, all the while thinking, there is no way a bank would lend to us. Well, in late 2020, they went to Kiwibank and got pre-approval to buy a rental property, and by December, they had signed up to a $610,000 10-year-old house. Using the equity they had in their family home, they only needed a $10,000 deposit, and they took on an interest-only mortgage. Despite their accountant pressuring them to buy a rental way down south in Dunedin, they wanted something they could drive past, so they actually purchased one in the town they lived in. Now, I know they really rate their accountant, but I'm honestly starting to question their point of view, and I also neglected to ask what they pay their accountant per year to manage all the various aspects of their money. At this stage, the mortgage on their own home was hovering at around $180,000. Over the years, they had taken out two $15,000 top-up loans for home improvements, plus a further $25,000. Plus, they drew back down on their revolving credit an unknown amount to replace a car. Plus, she took on a car loan as a part of her business. Reaching for just a little more debt has been an ongoing habit for a very long time. So, in total, across two properties, they now had mortgage debt of $780,000. The investment property they bought was compliant with the government rules of the day and good to go. It is located close to a hospital, and their tenants generally worked at the hospital. They offered a 12-month tenancy, increased the rent every year, and started with a property manager paying them 7.5% of the rental income. But they saw little value in using them, so they took over the management of the property themselves. Their first tenants were med students and stayed 2 years, and Tokyo and Rio really thought they were onto a winner by tapping into that market. Well, the first tenants handed over to the next group of med students. Tokyo even gave the exiting tenants a finder's fee for doing so. But by the third change of tenants, things got messy, with a random bunch of tenants moving in. Now in their fourth year, things appear to have settled down again, and they now rent to a family where both adults work as nurses. And the current rent they charge is $595 a week, and they get some enjoyment out of the fact that they are providing a nice, warm home to this family. When I asked about the money-making aspect of this investment, she initially said that with an annual rental income of $30,940, it, quote, washes its own face. But a deeper dive indicated that it didn't do that at all. In fact, she's quite unsure of the exact numbers, but estimates that they are contributing an additional $600 a month or $7,200 a year to this investment, in part due to rising mortgage interest rates. to make sure the mortgage payments are met and other outgoings are covered. She said that they have very much been stung by not running those high interest rate projections. I asked what their long-term plan with this property is. Why did they buy it, and how do they see it growing their wealth? And do they get to keep any of the rent that is paid? Heck no. As you can see, it costs them to own it. And not only have interest rates increased for their rental, but they have increased on their personal mortgage as well. They purchased this investment property for $610,000 in late 2020, and today it has an estimated value of $700,000, although we can never be sure of the price of a property until it's sold. And currently, house prices throughout New Zealand have dropped. This is where the reality of an interest-only mortgage really comes into play. The whole concept relies on the property shooting up in value. But when it barely does, or even worse, if the value drops, all you are doing is paying interest to your bank and not buying back one single brick of your home. They bought it in the hope that they could sell it for more sometime down the track, so harvesting capital gains are the goal. But with government changes that affect the rental property market, things are a little murky at the moment. The Bright Line test is changing, interest deductibility rules are changing, it's all in favour of landlords, but I suspect that they are going to be paying their accountant a pretty penny to work it all out. Their initial idea was to keep this property for 10 years and then sell it for a big profit. And during that time, the rent would cover all the expenses. But given that her initial look into the numbers shows her that her returns are dismal and they are topping this investment up with their own after-tax income, they would consider selling it after they've passed any Bright Line test that would make them essentially pay a capital gains tax. So her explanation of the viability of this is just all so grey and unclear, and she said that although she understood the theory of buying an investment property, tenants pay all the bills and you sell the house down the track and pocket the capital gains, in practice having to transfer your own income to make sure the mortgage payment goes out, that gets tired pretty darn fast, and they didn't sign up for this, she said. Since refixing their mortgage in late 2022, they've been topping up the payments, and she said that they are seriously getting over it. She is no longer liking the concept of an interest-only mortgage. She just feels like they are getting nowhere. They are completely reliant on capital gains, which don't appear to be working in their favour at the moment. They bought in late 2020 and renewed their mortgage 2 years later on another short cycle, and she said that she is growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, hence the idea of selling is being floated. And of course, the mortgage structure itself is a complicated arrangement. When they refixed, the broker proposed splitting up their mortgage because it would, they said, put them in a very good position to take on future lending for their next property. So they have a $374,000 mortgage with Westpac on a 6.55% interest rate that expires in December 2024. They have a $238,000 mortgage with ASB at a 6.49% interest rate, which expires at a similar time. Now, my math tells me that they took out a $600,000 mortgage in late 2020 and today they owe $612,000. So to me, the only winners in this are Westpac, ASB, and the tenants themselves. Tokyo would like you listening to this to be really cautious about anyone who says having a rental is a great way to build wealth. They are waiting to see if that is ever going to be their reality, and it will be interesting to check in a few years and see what has changed for this couple in regards to investment property. They asked themselves, why is this investment property not working for them? They didn't pay at the top of the market when they bought it, so what have they done wrong? Now, sniffing an opportunity, their real estate agent got in touch a few months after they bought it, saying, "Hey, look at your capital gains. Fancy buying another?" But it was such a stupid thing for them to crow about because there are just so many factors involved in property. And mortgage interest rates have had more of an influence than they ever could have imagined. So now the prevailing advice is to just hold on tight and wait for interest rates to drop, wait for the government to change policy so that it benefits landlords, and for house prices to rise. In my experience, their experience is incredibly common, and for anyone considering buying an investment property, you really need to grill anyone giving you advice and ask for some real data on the financial comings and goings of this type of investment. It is far too simplistic to look at buy price, sell price, and monthly rental returns. So as of mid-2024, the mortgage on their own home is now $170,000 with a 6.99% interest rate that comes up for a renewal in June of 2025. Their home has a value of about $600,000. They have increased their fortnightly payments with the intention of making some headway on it, and if the rental does get sold, their longer-term plans are to attack this mortgage and then once their home is paid off, start investing in an index fund. Now, as mentioned, in 2023, Rio's income was $138,000, but hers was a little more, shall we say, unknown, given she was self-employed. They had a lot of outgoings and were in a bit of a bind. Her business had slowed down and fewer clients meant a lower income. At the end of 2023 and as 2024 dawned, they still had some big bills on the horizon. The rental property had some expenses, there was Body Corp insurance to pay, and the Body Corp annual fees, topping up the mortgage weekly, an ACC bill to pay, and plus, of course, Christmas was in the middle of all that, which is typically a time when many sole traders enter a quiet period. They didn't go for the top-up loan in the end after my advice to try to find some more money instead. But to meet some of these costs, she did what I've seen others do, and she sold her Simplicity investment just to get them through that tight period. In reality, this money never should have been invested in the first place because their financial foundation was just not strong enough to also be investing. She had not allowed for increased investment property costs, business expenses, etc., and she was just running by the seat of her pants, she said. I asked if she learned an important lesson about why you should never put money in the share market that you need in the short term. She had read the theory of an emergency fund, but this gave her a hands-on lesson in why you actually need one and why you should structure your entire financial life more carefully, something that she is thankfully now doing. With more bills to pay during this time, it was my questioning of the top-up loan that made her stop and reassess her situation. She had, it turns out, already started the ball rolling on earning more money. And I was delighted to later hear that she had secured herself a full-time PAYE job, earning about $100,000 a year. This means that from about February, they will now receive a steady combined income of about $238,000 a year. Now, the decision to move into paid employment after 8 years of working for herself, it had been brewing for a while. Being self-employed was just adding too much uncertainty to her life and to their finances. So this is a huge positive step for them as a family, and she has loved the transition. Seeing their good incomes enter their bank account and still having money left over when the bills are paid is a very powerful feeling, Tokyo said. In addition to a regular paycheck, there are other benefits, such as her employer offering health insurance and, of course, KiwiSaver. Her fund is finally getting some decent contributions each month. And she didn't muck around putting her income to good use, creating a number of sinking funds with their bank to plan for future expenses, plus slowly and in a boring fashion grow their wealth over time. Although they still have the rental property, they are done with this topsy-turvy way of trying to make a buck. She has concluded that consistent good money habits over a long period of time is what grows wealth. If she can keep reminding herself of that, they will be fine. Now, creating an emergency fund has been front and centre in 2024, and when we spoke in mid-June, the balance was up to $12,000. She had also set up and was contributing to a number of sinking funds, which will cover car costs, food costs, specifically saving up for annual home kill costs, which is such a New Zealand thing, school-related costs, replacing their boat and general hunting costs, annual insurance premiums, power and internet, and of course, Christmas. She was considering setting one up for their annual rates, but has instead moved to making a monthly payment to her council, which she has found to be far easier to budget for. Now, for the record, Johnny and I actually pay our $77 rates bill weekly. It just makes our monthly expenses more even to manage. Now, while budgeting and planning well for future costs, she's actually still cleaning up the mess left from her business, aged IRD debt, rental interest debt, and provisional tax, and is on a payment plan with the IRD to pay off the $24,000 that they still owe. She is paying $2,000 per month plus interest and has taken some time to create an Excel spreadsheet that tells her what is due and when. This then allows her to set up a sinking fund in her bank to make sure that the money is saved up for to make these payments. She is now fully wrapped up her business, and once these debts are gone, she can completely move on. She said she was tempted to use their emergency fund to pay this off in full, but I'd really discourage that. The IRD is important, but there is a plan in place to pay it off, so it's not an emergency, and treating it that way will be yet another knee-jerk reaction to a situation, such as selling off the managed funds. Although I see the temptation, you are likely to fix one problem and create another, and the chances of a financial crisis happening soon after you drain the emergency fund account are real. And for anyone listening to this thinking, but Ruth, she is paying interest on the IRD debt, well, so be it. This is the same couple who happily signed up to an interest-only mortgage. Math does not happen in isolation. Life plays a big part too, and you never quite know how it's going to go. Having a steady income plus structure in their banking, plus stripping away the complexities of provisional tax and what have you, they are now settling into a routine, and she said it takes patience and time, but they are gaining financial stability month on month. Remember that they really only kicked off this big tidy up in late 2023. They are making good progress, but it is not a straight line to the finish. So brace yourself for some confusing investment property math. They had refinanced the rental in December 2022, and goodness knows how it happened, and she was at a loss to explain it to me, but $20,000 was transferred back to them. Once again, a lump sum of money seemed to appear right when they could find a use for it, and I think in part because they didn't see a financial reckoning looming, in 2023 they took a big trip away with the family. It was a trip they had planned for, but never saved for. So this windfall landed like manna from heaven. At around the same time, Rio received a $14,500 windfall in the form of a union-negotiated back pay settlement. She was in debt to the IRD, and part of her knew this money should go to that debt, but the payment plan was set up for that. So it felt like money they could use, and she said that if she were to be completely honest, they were probably going to pay for their 7-week trip on credit cards up until that point. So, as it was, they spent $34,000 in total, or the entirety of both windfalls. So, it's amazing how your expenses stretch to the money you have if you let them. Now, my head was in my hands a little as I heard this, but no part of me was in any way surprised. When we make our lives financially complex, it's pretty easy to justify expenses and decisions. But I had to know what, if anything, she learned from this. A whole lot, thank goodness. Their wanderlust has not diminished, but now they are having conversations about what everyone wants to do, and they are finding out what things might cost before they say yes. They had a South Island trip planned when we spoke, and they have saved up, pre-booked and prepaid for all the big expenses and are working towards putting spending money aside. They have set a budget, and they know all their costs as best they can in advance. Then it's a matter of going and executing the family plan. I love this, absolutely love it. Tokyo said that they are changing direction 1 degree at a time, but the changes will be long-lasting. I hope so. Her takeaway is that she has taken on the primary responsibility to learn about money and fill in the gaps in her knowledge, and that Rio puts his faith in her skills and supports her. Because she is doing a lot of it on her own, when it comes to making a family decision about whether to pay off your tax bill or update the boat, because they could sell theirs, she said, for $7,500, but a newer one would cost $30,000, and it's taking a bit of negotiating, but the fact they talk through all options is encouraging. Everyone gets to have a say, and I like that, and each are hopefully realising that every financial decision has a consequence. At this stage, the general agreement is that once they have saved up enough money, while also meeting their other financial goals, they will replace that boat. And when that is done, they will then focus on increasing their mortgage payment. And when that is gone, they will step up their investments into index funds. Rio is interested, and they talk about it a lot, and she never acts without consulting, but she is still driving the strategy. He is happy with how happy she is. And as for resources, well, she mentioned the Money Hub website, which is really good, The Barefoot Investor, the Kiwi Moustachian Facebook page, and also Francis Cook and Keep the Change. Now, I'm running out of time in this episode, but it's not lost on her that she is learning things about money in her 40s, which she could have learned much younger. She said that Scott Pape's book that he wrote specifically for kids called Barefoot Kids is an excellent resource to use if you want to give kids a well-rounded view of their pūtea. As a result, she is doing things differently with her two tamariki, who are now about 11 and 13. It goes well beyond just teaching them to work for money, and has transitioned from using physical money to online banking, saving, and investing. Already their eldest has a net worth of $3,000, and the youngest is not far behind at $2,600. They are mostly invested in just the S&P 500 after their mum sold off all the individual companies she had initially signed them up for. They each handle money differently, but are equally interested, and already these two children are getting a good education in money, and playing an active role has given them a real sense of ownership, she said. Now, I am nearing the end of this episode, but before I wrap up, I just have another quick message from today's sponsor. If your finances are holding you back from living the life you want, try Pocketsmith out. They've got the tools to help you make money management easier. And have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. Over the course of just 1 month, as our email exchange progressed, her tone had completely changed. She became more assertive and more in control as some plans began to firm up about just how to manage money in their whare. She kept me updated, and by May of 2024, she felt she had a much greater degree of order and clarity as she got a handle on where and what their money was up to. This allowed her to start to model some future scenarios for the very first time, such as the part that a rental property might or might not play in the future. Tokyo said something that really stuck with me. She said that reaching 40 was a turning point where she had some big realizations about money. She said that it is important that you know how money works, or someone will be at your side to tell you their solution. I'm an advocate of solving your own problems if you possibly can. And if you need to pull someone in to help, you really do need to ask the question of what is in it for them. Go in with your eyes wide open. The real estate agent who phoned them up hinting that they should buy another property was looking for a commission. Their banker wanted to keep receiving interest payments on their debts. The accountant who encouraged them to buy a rental property was looking for annual income from doing the accounts. If you let them, there are plenty who want to take a cut of the financial decisions you are making. And I think I was one of the first to be so bold as to question what on earth they were doing. Regarding their rental property, having tried it as an experiment, she said, they are coming to the conclusion that it is just not the way they want to do things. It's been a steep learning curve, but ultimately they no longer want or need the stress of the financial jiggery-pokery of managing that type of investment. I think that when all is said and done, whether they keep it or sell it, they won't have any idea of how this investment has performed financially. There is just too much smoke and mirrors in this investment. I knew from our first email that she had the potential to move away from their reliance on debt, and she is proving me correct. If you want to get out of debt, rule number 1 is that you need to stop borrowing money, and they boldly did exactly that. PAYE work is made extra awesome if you manage the money you make well, and these two now make an excellent annual income. Given that just like work can dry up in your own business and your employer could also lay you off, having an emergency fund is her ticket to freedom, and it's what will keep her from going back into debt. If I woke up in her shoes, particularly given the changes the government has been making of late, I'd put the boat savings on ice until I had a fully stocked emergency fund to protect my whānau. Her last update to me said that there was not really much to report, which Tokyo pointed out is actually kind of awesome. I think, and I sincerely hope, that the boom and bust financial roller coaster is finally over for this family, and that they have permanently settled into a financial routine and are reducing debt and saving up for things. Next time a windfall comes their way, they will be able to add it to an already strong base. With sinking funds up and cranking, a windfall could go straight to their mortgage, or when that is gone, straight to investment. Imagine if instead of being a finite sum of money that a windfall is, if that windfall was invested and became the goose that continued to lay the golden egg each year, how good that would be. They had an amazing holiday to the South Island in the end, even ending with money to spare, a unique and wonderful feeling, she said. And they are on track with tax repayments and have done some forecasting to see the financial truth of their investment property and what they are paying to prop it up. Our most recent email said that she estimates they will sell it within the year, but it's a matter of what price they will accept that will at least in some way make the whole episode feel at least a little worthwhile, she said. So finally, I just want to say to Tokyo and Rio, thank you so very much for being so open with your experience. I've created this podcast from our very lengthy chat and from our email exchanges, and it's been a real honour to have played a small part in you both feeling so much better financially than you were back in just late 2023. So please don't stop this momentum that you have created. And to you listening, I've said it before and I'll say it again, you will astound yourself at the progress you can make if you just decide to make a start. So what's stopping you from trying? So that's all from me this week, another very brief episode. If you want to get in touch, you know you can find me at thehappysaver.com. And please do share this podcast with your friends. It is the best way that people can learn about it. And of course, I would love it if you would talk more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.